Hey everybody, my name is Eric Eldon. I'm the managing editor of TechCrunch, and with me today is Andrew Chen, currently a partner at Andreessen Horowitz and a longtime growth marketer who many of you have probably read over the years on his personal blog. Before we get started, just remember you can get questions to me by using the Slido feature of the TechCrunch event app. I'll get them up here. And with that, we're going to get started. Andrew.
Awesome.
You've been a growth marketer for how many years?
Since I worked in ad tech, like maybe 15 years ago.
All right.
It's been a while, yes.
And it's been mainly consumer the entire time.
That's right.
What's happened?
Yeah. I think and it's something that people have asked before, which is like, what's actually exciting in consumer right now? And I think what we're finding is that the things that were really, really interesting and exciting 10 years ago have just completely morphed. It used to be that you had hundreds of teams that were working on like a new photo sharing app or a new messaging app or whatever, and it just turns out I think all of those ideas have now been very much tried. And what we have to all be excited about, I think, in the industry just looks very, very different these days. And so, personally, at least for me, number one, you have to like see the fact that tech is just being part of the physical world, these days, where obviously you have like the rideshare type companies. There's groceries, there's scooters, there's the whole thing, and like that's something that's really changing the way that we actually live day to day, and like that's really exciting. That's obviously lives in the consumer sphere. The other area that I'm also super excited about is you look at in the last 12 months where you have a product like Fortnite, which is again it's not a messaging app, it's not a photo sharing app, but you have a product like that basically go from 0 to like 200 million users. Like how can you not be excited for where consumer products are going? And so we can talk about that. Obviously, the panel before us was talking a bunch about fintech. That's a very interesting area. We also see a lot of consumer design and product expertise going into the workplace with like I'm loving the products that I'm using at work today, which is like kind of a shocking thing if you can imagine, like back when everyone was using like purely enterprise software. And so I think what you're seeing is that consumer DNA, those teams are now working in a lot of different areas as opposed to what we sort of classically think of in mobile apps.
So consumer is everything now?
I think it's consumer teams that maybe 10 years ago would have been working on Facebook apps and mobile apps, I think are now working on a much broader segment of products than what they would have worked on before.
It's a lot of Facebook platform type of people, huh?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes. I think they were very much educated during that era and have now are looking for new platforms, new ideas that that can build the next huge company.
So what stayed the same about growth? I mean, when you're working with your portfolio companies and talking to people who are pitching you, what's the same about growth versus when you started, right? Like, what are the techniques that have just like the sort of like true thing that people need to think about?
That's right. Yeah. So I think for startups, you often can sort of just classify what you're doing as you have the 0 to 1 stage where you're trying to get to product market fit. And a lot of that is, you're doing like very qualitative things, very non-scalable things. You're really trying to learn from your customer. And then you get to a phase where it's really about, let's just make this as big as possible, right? And I think a lot of the growth techniques that we, all read about, whether that's everything from paid marketing to viral growth to SEO to a lot of these other things, a lot of the largest levers actually remain very much the same. I think we should be just as excited right now about products that can grow, virally super fast. But they might be happening like, as a form of a new design collaboration tool, like in the workplace, or it might be a new chat, product, but it's just for folks that are interested in, certain kinds of, gaming experiences. And so viral growth and all of that is super useful. Now, I think what it has changed is many of you may know that actually the first time there were internet like banner ads, the click-through rate was actually like 70%, like 70, right? It was just like incredible because people were like, what the heck is this? Like, this is amazing. Like, I'm gonna click on this thing. And then if you look at the actually like, global like internet click-through rates, it's now like, 0.05% or something like, so it's literally fallen several orders of magnitude down to what it is. And I think what we see is that every single new growth channel, starting from any of these advertising models, email marketing, et cetera, they all go through this kind of like curve where things perform worse and worse and worse. I've blogged about this as like the law of shitty click-throughs. Like it's just this unescapable thing. And so what ends up happening is, I think for any entrepreneur that's in the ecosystem, you always have to find like is maybe the untapped thing that a lot of companies haven't all jumped on yet, and try to get to that. And you're always trying to find your edge. And so so in the workplace, that might be Slack, that might be the Google Suite, right? It might be something like that. Within games, like I know everybody's thinking about Reddit, they're thinking about Twitch. If you're building like a DTC product, you're thinking about Instagram influencers, because these are all the cutting edge things where the performance of the channel has not been degraded because of competition and kind of the natural kind of decay of these things.
And so what are the growth channels or platforms that you're interested in?
Yeah, and the things that I am super excited about, that I think are super, that are just big and there's just not a lot happening in it. I would say number one, like you just have to look at video as just this incredible like platform that is now not just YouTube but also Facebook, obviously. Even like what we think of as like stories, right? Like Instagram stories and Snap stories is really like the first time that you're having hundreds of millions of consumers actually create video in this like really unique format, TikTok, obviously, et cetera. And so one of the big areas that I've been thinking a lot about is what does it mean to be kind of like a video native product? Something that when your consumers engage in it, it automatically generates video and automatically can distribute itself as it goes, right? And so the obvious, kind of, that's the obvious underpinning of why like something like Fortnite or Riot Games' like Teamfight Tactics or something like that has grown really, really fast. But you could also imagine that that there is a really obvious natural application maybe in like fitness, right? Where if you have like a coach that's like talking to you and is already recording video, like that might be something that you want to actually collect and then like publish somewhere. So that sort of like video is kind of one really big area. I would say the other big area that I've been thinking a lot about is something I've been jokingly calling the IRL channel, just like in real life. The fact that like if you have tech products that you actually encounter in the physical world, but then as a result of that you end up downloading the app and actually interacting with it, that's actually a format that not just only works for lime green scooters, right? But it also works when you are someplace like Phoenix, Arizona, and you stumble upon a house with a sign that says open door on it, and maybe that causes you to engage with that platform, and on and on and on, right? And so I think those are all super. These days, obviously, when you walk into any restaurant in San Francisco, you end up seeing like a bunch of the companies that are all kind of engaging in the restaurant ecosystem. Like that's also very, very interesting and becomes a really an entree. And I think the IRL channel is fascinating because you really have to have a certain type of product in order to compete there. And so it's just not quite as competitive as buying like Facebook ads, right? Like, which is something that like, as soon as you have some creative that's working, you should just be prepared for a bunch of other startups that, in your category to fast follow you. Gotcha.
I'm going to hit a couple questions here. This is from Anonymous. Name 3 upcoming trends.
3 upcoming trends, yeah.
Or 4.
Yeah. So a couple trends that that I think are really interesting, kind of in sectors that I'm following. I think one is just the evolution of the marketplace category, which is one which has very much been about moving products from point A to point B, and we basically like I'm pretty amazed. Like we've solved that in the last 10, 15 years, where all of a sudden. Anything that you see on the internet, you can click and then gets delivered to you. But we have all these really interesting, important services, right? Whether that's like taking care of your kids, like taking care of your aging, family, taking care of your, having like a personal assistant, having like a chef come to your home. Like these are all services, like the entire service economy, which is something that's like, trillion plus, type opportunity. A lot of that hasn't been digitized. I'm like very interested in all of that as kind of the next evolution of kind of the Uber for X type kind of model. As we've been talking about, I think there's a lot going on with just bringing both consumer design as well as consumer growth strategies and tactics to like every corner of the software sphere, right? And so these days I'm having conversations with people that are working on everything from like hardware to like enterprise software to healthcare that are all thinking about, how do we actually, get people to adopt this and build products in a way where, they actually care about engagement and, retention and acquisition and all the other stuff that I work on. So
Gotcha.
Those are a couple.
This is from Omer. What do you think about on-demand housing market, co-living, flexible living, furnished rental markets? So examples are Star City, Sunder, Zeus Living, etc.
Yeah. So this is a market that real estate and kind of at a broad level, and then I think one level more narrow, just sort of like consumer residential. This is a really exciting market, I think, because it's something that has just like not really changed in many ways. The way that that I came to the Bay Area 12 years ago and went on Craigslist and applied to be roommates with a couple other folks. Like that same experience is still like being repeated today, which is if you imagine like all the things that have changed over the last 12 years. I mean, like, that was like 2000. I mean, that was like when the iPhone just came out, and it's still something that really hasn't changed. And so, I think there's a huge opportunity to, to make that something that's tech enabled. Now, I think the downsides of that market, and something that I think is you have to be very critical about, is it's part of the kind of market where it's just not, the network effects are fairly weak, and it's hard to build a winner-take-all kind of company there. And so you really have to think hard about what is it going to be that that you're going to do that's going to scale and grow in a way that's going to be defensible versus everyone else that's doing it. And so I think that's why we've seen that in that space of Sonder and Lyric, and I think we've seen like maybe 20, 30, 40, like just a ton of companies that are all, in that space because it's so easy to get started.
And then does capital become the moat later on, or what happens there?
Yeah, I think people have talked about a couple different theories as to how that's going to work. I think one would be, you don't have network effects, but you do have scale effects, right? Which is that if you become the really large, dominant tech-enabled company that can work with commercial real estate developers, that might be something where they prefer working with you over somebody that is just smaller, whether that's a capital thing or just a success thing. That would be one. The second is, like I actually kind of love the idea that maybe like for all of us that have lived in SF or kind of move around in jobs, I think the average tenure within San Francisco of like a, software engineer or something is like under 2 years right now, which means you probably also get that people are like moving around quite a bit. And if you could stay with one company, one rental company, and say like, this year I'm going to live in Noe Valley, and the next year I'm going to live in Potrero, and the next year I'm going to live in Caw Hollow, and they just help you kind of move around, and you don't even have to like set up your cable and like whatever, that could be something that you eventually at a very large scale, you could get to real network effects. And so, those would be the kind of things I would think about there.
What types of revenue models are appealing to you for consumer internet companies? So subscription, advertising, freemium, transactional. Is there anything there where you're like, this is the way to go? Or are you just like, does it depend on the market and the product?
Yeah. That's I'll tell you which one I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in ad-supported companies.
And after all your years
exactly. After all my, I think it's like people talk about how you're always fighting your last battle, right? And so no, but I think what we're finding these days is that a lot of times as you build a kind of like very audience-based ad-supported business, that if you get all the way to scale and then you want to turn, the ads, you want to build an ads marketplace and build all the self-serve tools and all this other stuff, you actually have then several more years of trying to build a new marketplace with the sides of, yourself, your audience, and then advertisers. And that is its own network effect that you have to figure out how to bootstrap and scale. And so I think, because of that, it becomes, what Elad Gil has written about is kind of a two miracle startup, right? Not only do you have to figure out, get the thing working, then you need to actually set up and make the business model work. So because of that, going back to the original part of your question, I think what that leads to is the idea that actually some of the most interesting unlocks, I think, that are within consumer internet actually come from tweaking the business model. And I think in particular, one of the areas that we've gotten really excited about is, we all know what the gig economy is. Well, is there something that's actually not the gig economy? Maybe it's maybe we should call it the passion economy. It's something where you just kind of do whatever you're the most excited about, in life, whether that's unboxing gadgets on the internet and recording videos or playing video games or doing whatever. And you actually have this direct payment way of building an audience and actually sustaining a lifestyle. And as you know,
you're investing in the platforms.
Exactly. Yeah,
people,
that's
but
right.
Not those people per se.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So you can build a platform that sort of enables all of that to happen. And I think we've just figured out that actually consumers these days are way more excited about opening up their wallets and paying on the internet than they ever have before. And so I think it's possible to then kind of solve, I think, one of the hard UX problems of how do you intermingle your content and your advertising, right? If you can remove the advertising and it's a direct business model, that's potentially interesting. So we've looked at companies kind of everywhere from podcasting and newsletters, a company called Substack that we're investors in, within game streaming, within education, within all sorts of things that sort of are all about the infrastructure to allow for that.
Did big tech, Amazon, Google, Facebook, et cetera, kill innovation in consumer and e-commerce? Have you given up on competition and disruption in marketplaces, chats, search? You kind of got at this, but...
Yeah. I mean, it's a big question. I mean, I think... the part of the whole thing that within e-commerce that I focus on is really the idea that the product itself has to be really unique, and it has to be you need a theory of defensibility on how you're gonna scale it over time. I think the thing that's been really hard has been you have folks that are kind of drop shipping from the same manufacturers, kind of putting a veneer of a brand and then buying ads on the other side. Right, and it just turns out that is very, very hard to defend. And so to me, that's less about the big tech companies and much more about literally just is the underlying thing something that you can scale past a couple $1 million.
Gotcha. Do you think immersive tech like voice and VR will lead to a disruption in content design for consumer consumption?
Yeah. So we are always and I'm always looking at new technology platforms because every time you have a new technology platform, that becomes an interesting new surface area for consumers to interact with. There's new growth channels oftentimes. If you're one of the first apps on a new platform, if you all remember in 2007, or I guess 2009 is when the App Store came out, right? It was all the top apps were fart apps and flashlight apps and whatever, right? And it's that's what it took to be a top app in the store, and that's an awesome time to be a developer. And so I think that the Quest is certainly a device that I love. The Oculus Quest is a device that I love. I'm very excited to see what happens there. I think that the fact that there's so much voice, kind of in devices all over, and they're building it into everything, I think is very, very exciting. I think they need to work on all the platforms that are building, these into app platforms need to work a lot more on discoverability, so that developers actually can, create the traction that they want. But I think assuming that some of this stuff can get unlocked, I think it's a super exciting set space.
What are your colleagues in the VC world overestimating too much about opportunities?
That's a good one.
That's my question.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yeah. So that's good. To be honest, I mean, I think within the spaces that I look at, I'd say number one, within kind of games, entertainment, et cetera. I think that there's probably an esports, kind of like a little too much hype on that end. Like I'm much more excited about like investing in whatever will be the next Fortnite as opposed to the teams kind of around it. You know, that's kind of like would be one example. I have thought often that you know, if you're going to build kind of like an Uber for X, like it turns out that that's like actually not a good paradigm. Like if you actually now go back and you're like, okay, well, what would you have wanted to invest in? You know, like there's really not that many categories where it would have worked. And so I think there's a fundamental kind of rethinking that needs to happen around marketplaces into probably being more, you know, managed marketplaces where the company actually does more than, you know, as opposed to doing this kind of like you build a mobile app and then you just kind of like, you know, try to do all the pricing and, you know, all the things that Uber's done.
What are your thoughts on D2C brands' acquisition channels becoming saturated? Is there a solution you see for these brands moving to?
Yeah, I think if you're gonna do something in e-commerce and kind of this, you know, the direct-to-consumer side, you have to have, I think, from the very, very beginning, a clear point of view on what is going to be your defensible growth channel as you scale out, right? I think one of the most interesting ones is probably one where you know, like Ipsy did this with Michelle Phan. You basically partner with a set of influencers starting from day one, and you know they're actually maybe one of your co-founders. You know, Anna's company obviously is another one, and you know that's obviously something that's defensible. Or it has to be a category where, you know, as you build the thing, there's, you know, like I think like actually Hims and Row and some of these are kind of like this, where because there's this whole subscription tail that kind of like continues, what that means is that consumers are not necessarily making the choice month to month or year to year, like should I use you or should I use your competitor? And so that means that you can kind of walk through the, you know, the particular growth channel that works, and then you can kind of shut the door behind you, and you know the like future competitors, you know, won't be there.
Awesome. Well, we're unfortunately out of time.
Awesome.
Andrew, you can find him all over the internet, I believe.
Yes, you can tweet at me. I like Twitter.
Thank you so much, everybody. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.